In the vast wilderness of the ancient Near East, far from the noise of cities and empires, there is a quiet moment in history that changed the direction of an entire people. It begins not with a king, not with a prophet who knew his destiny, but with a man living in exile, tending sheep in the desert. This man was Moses, and his encounter with a burning bush on the slopes of Mount Horeb would become one of the most iconic and influential events in biblical history. This is the story of what happened, why it mattered, and how this unusual moment shaped the future of a nation. To understand the burning bush, we need to understand the life Moses was living before it happened. Moses was born in Egypt at a time when the Hebrew people were enslaved by the Pharaoh. According to the biblical account, the Hebrews were growing in number, and the Egyptian king feared that one day they might rise up. As a result, Pharaoh ordered that all newborn Hebrew boys be killed. Moses survived only because his mother placed him in a basket and set him afloat on the Nile River. He was found by the daughter of Pharaoh, adopted and raised in the royal household. This unusual beginning meant that Moses grew up with an identity split between two worlds. He was Hebrew by birth, but Egyptian by education and upbringing. As Moses became an adult, the tension between these two identities grew. One day he witnessed an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. Seeing an injustice against his own people, Moses intervened and killed the Egyptian. But word spread quickly, and Pharaoh sought to have Moses executed. Moses fled Egypt, leaving behind his life of privilege and power. He traveled eastward across the Sinai Peninsula and eventually settled in the land of Midian, a remote region inhabited by nomadic tribes. In Midian, Moses began a completely different life. He married into a local family, worked as a shepherd, and spent his days guiding flocks across dry and rugged landscapes. He was no longer a prince of Egypt, no longer a man of influence. By all appearances, his story was small and quiet. He might have expected to live out his days in obscurity. And yet, it was in this quiet life, in the middle of a remote desert, that Moses encountered something extraordinary. One day, while leading his flock near the mountain known as Horeb, Moses noticed something unusual. In the distance, a shrub appeared to be engulfed in flames. Fire in the desert was not unheard of, but this fire behaved differently. The flames burned brightly, but the bush itself was not being consumed. It did not crumble or turn to ash. It simply burned, steady and continuous, as if the fire came from somewhere beyond natural explanation. Curious, Moses approached. The biblical text emphasizes that he turned aside deliberately, meaning he chose to investigate. This decision to look closer is a small detail, but an important one. It was the moment where an ordinary shepherd became part of an extraordinary story. As Moses drew near, a voice called out from the fire, speaking his name twice. "Moses, Moses." And Moses responded simply, "Here I am." The voice instructed him to come no closer and to remove his sandals, because the place where he stood was holy ground. This was Moses' first indication that this was no ordinary fire. The presence speaking to him identified itself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the same God connected to the earliest ancestors of the Hebrew people. Moses was afraid and hid his face, realizing he was in the presence of something far greater than he had imagined. The message that followed was both personal and national. The voice told Moses that the suffering of the Hebrew people in Egypt had not gone unnoticed. Their cries, their oppression, and their hardship were known. The time had come for them to be freed from slavery and brought into a land of their own. And then came the unexpected part. Moses was chosen to lead them. Moses immediately questioned this. He had been away from Egypt for decades. He was not a leader, not a warrior, not someone with influence or authority. He saw himself as the wrong person for such a mission. His first objection was simple. Who am I to go to Pharaoh? The response he received was not a list of qualifications or a reassurance of his abilities. Instead, the voice said, I will be with you. The emphasis was not on Moses' strength, but on the presence and guidance promised to him. Still unsure, Moses asked another question, one that would become one of the most important theological moments in the Bible. He wanted to know what name he should use when speaking to the people. What should he call the God who was sending him? The answer was unusual and profound. The voice replied, I am who I am. In Hebrew, this phrase is connected to the name Yahweh, a name that signifies existence, being, and eternity. It was a way of saying that this God is self-sustaining, uncreated, and constant. The burning bush itself symbolized the same idea. A fire that burned without needing fuel, a flame that existed beyond the limitations of nature. The imagery connected perfectly to the meaning of the name. Moses still hesitated. He worried the people would not believe him. He said he was not a good speaker and feared confronting Pharaoh. In response, the voice from the bush offered signs, assistance, and reassurances. Moses was told that his brother Aaron could speak on his behalf and that he would not be alone in this mission. Step by step, his objections were answered. Eventually, Moses accepted the calling. He put on his sandals again, gathered his flock, and returned to his family. The man who had once fled Egypt in fear was now preparing to return there with a mission that would alter the course of history. The burning bush story is short, but it carries layers of meaning. Historically, it marks the moment Moses transitioned from a life of hiding to a life of leadership. Geographically, Mount Horeb becomes a central setting for future revelations. Symbolically, the bush represents a divine presence that is powerful, enduring, and mysterious. And in terms of identity, Moses' encounter teaches that great missions often begin in unexpected places, with people who do not feel ready. The story also reflects a theme found throughout ancient texts. The idea that deserts, mountains, and remote places were viewed as locations of revelation. Away from the distractions of everyday life, people in the ancient world often believed that these quiet places allowed for deeper encounters with the divine. Moses' experience fits into this cultural understanding. Today, the burning bush narrative remains one of the most studied and discussed events in biblical literature. For historians, it provides insight into how ancient people understood calling and leadership. For scholars of religion, it offers a rich exploration of divine identity through the name I Am. And for many readers, it symbolizes purpose found in unexpected moments. What makes this story enduring is not only the dramatic image of a bush that burns without being consumed, but the transformation of Moses, a man who felt unprepared and unqualified, yet became central to the liberation of an entire people. The burning bush marks the beginning of that transformation. And so, the simple shepherd walking in the desert becomes a leader who would confront Pharaoh, guide a nation out of slavery, and shape the identity of generations to come. All of it began with a moment of curiosity, a step towards something unusual, and a voice calling him by name. This is the story of Moses and the burning bush, a turning point in the biblical narrative, a moment of calling, courage, and identity, and the beginning of a journey that would reshape history